Now, the real focus on today's lessons is actually the radicals. And the radical just refers to this root, and in particular we're going to focus on square roots to begin with. Now, these numbers here are very important ones that we're going to use. So it's quite important that you learn these numbers. Where these numbers came from, though, is just by multiplying the numbers together. So 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, and so on. So when you work out square root, what you're actually asking is which number times by itself gives you this number, which is why these numbers here are the same on both sides. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use that to simplify radicals. Now, all these radicals you can work out perfectly as decimals. If we pick one that's in between here, say like radical 3, if you try and think of a number that you multiply by itself to give you 3, you're going to struggle on that. If you try doing it on a calculator, you're going to see why. It's actually an irrational number. It's a number that goes on forever and ever, and there's no pattern. So it's going to be 1 point something. The reason I know it's 1 point something, because radical 3 is between radical 1 and radical 4. Now, for larger radicals, we want to be able to simplify them, just like with, say, fractions. So, this is how we're going to simplify them. So, radical 20, you can try working out on a calculator, it's going to give you a huge long decimal. We have to find two smaller radicals and multiply together to make 20. But importantly, one of the two radicals must be a number on here, so we can actually work it out. So, for example, I notice that 20 is 2 times 10. But on my list, I don't have radical 2, and I don't have radical 10. So that's actually not going to help me to simplify this. But there is another choice. I could go with radical 4 and radical 5. And radical 4 is on this list. It's 2. And so when I'm writing this out, I think of two numbers that times to make this number. But I make sure the one that appears on this list appears first when we write the radical down. So square root of 4, we're just going to write out what it was, 2. And the second one we shouldn't be able to work out anyway, so we just leave it as radical 5. So this is called simplified radicals because the radical we finish with in our answer is smaller than the radical that we started with. Now these are equal to each other, it's just a different way of writing the same thing. I guess you could think of it like fractions. So if we had 4/8, we could say it's 2/4, or we could say that it's 1/2. So we just want to make sure that we all agree on what's the best way of writing the answer. And we're going to go with the one with the smallest numbers, or in this case, the one with the smallest radicals. Now the implication of this is, after you've simplified once, you might actually be able to simplify for a second time. So I need to find two numbers that times to make 5, where one of the number appears on this list. Now I crossed out radical 1, because otherwise I just get 1 times 5, and I'm still back to where I started with. And none of these numbers divide into this number, so actually I'm finished for this question. Now, if I choose a larger question, though, I might be able to simplify more than once. Now, as the numbers get bigger, you might also not recognise two numbers that divide into this number. So one way you can try that is, you can try dividing 4s into 80 to see if it works. And actually for this one, it does. So square root of 4 is 2, and I've simplified once. But I know I can simplify radical 20, because I just did so a second ago. So I can continue here. So 20 is 4 and 5. Square root of 4 is 2. Multiplied by this 2 gives me 4. So sometimes you can actually simplify twice. Now this is going to be important for when you do the SOL, because it's possible you could have square root of 80 as answer A, you could have 2 root 20 as radical B, and you could have 4 radical 5 as answer C. And it says which of these is the simplest. And you might think, well, this works, but it's actually the wrong answer. So it is important that you check to make sure they have been fully simplified. Sometimes with larger questions, they appear more difficult than they actually are. So if I was doing the square root of 300, and you might start dividing 4s into 300, and actually 4s actually do divide into 300. Look for large factors as well. If the larger the factor you can find, the easier this is actually going to make your work. So for 300, I notice 100 divides in here, so I could write this as radical 100, radical 3, and the square root of 100 is 10, and then I'm actually finished. So the larger the factor that you can find at the start makes your life easier. And that has implications for this question too. 80 actually divides by 16. So I could just have said 16, 16s into 80 go 5, square root of 16 is 4, so 4 radical 5, Notice it's the same answer, but just with a lot less steps. So a couple of things to think about when you're doing this. You could end up with a different method from the person next to you who's working on it, but you should still end up with the same answer. If you can, try and find a large factor. It will make your life a lot easier when doing questions. This skill, being able to simplify radicals, you're going to be using throughout this unit. You're going to be using it when you do addition, when you do subtraction, when you do multiplication, and when you're going to do division. So spend a lot of time on these exercises to make sure you understand the basics for this whole unit.